Bonjour, mes amis. This video, once again unplanned. Yet, due to the last one, I'm going to extend a little further into the past from the last 3 to 5 decades. So you can see how things extend, and you already see how they are connected via the last video. Now you'll see how they extend even more so. So, I'll start at the beginning. 18th century, 1700s, Renaissance, towards the end of the Renaissance. You're seeing a redevelopment of plans for the Slavs and the Jews to overtake the whole of Europe, the rest of the Merino lands of Europe, which they hadn't managed to fully conquer by the Renaissance period, even though they've been putting a lot of effort into it during the Middle Ages, which you now know as the Dark Ages. They planned the whole giving of Africa to those of the Middle East, so letting the Middle Easterns and the Asians break Africa as much as they could as they managed it in their stead, while they continued to break the rest of Europe as much as they could. As you saw in that period, Russia overtook all the rest of the Balkan states, Poland, Romania, Czech, Yugoslav, Bulgaria, parts of Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, because some of the Middle East was taken over by the Russians, the Slavs of Russia. Now you can see that during the Middle Ages they moved all over Europe, through the lands of Macedon, through the lands of through the lands of Macedonia, through the lands of the Teutons, the Germans, and through the Teutons and through Macedon, these lines form the family Medicis in Italy. All you have to do is follow the family trees. This is what I did. Just go look back at the family trees. You'll see the lines, the strands of the Slavs that flow through these regions, going into the Mediterranean regions of Italy, forming the Medicis, and through the Medicis taking over the church. Well, they formed the church basically, but it became the Medicis and all the governmental forces of Europe via Rome. Now, come Renaissance, this was then they began taking back over Africa in its entirety, taking it back from the Middle East. And you'll see this resulted in the beginning of the First World War in the end of the 19th century and the formation of the Maastricht Treaty. Now, in the formation of the Maastricht Treaty is one side of the coin where they're taking care of the people movement for employment, so that those who own capital could not only have cheap labor because they create conditions around the different regions where people feel the need to move, but they could also be controlling the region that is Africa, the resources that they use in these commercial enterprises in Europe at the same instance. Now, the Maastricht Treaty, what this allowed, this meant that via the Maastricht Treaty, they'd start destabilizing huge parts of the Mediterranean areas of Europe, which they did via the First and Second World Wars. Italy, Barcelona, Portugal, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Greece, Turkey, North Africa. All of this was destabilized during the First and Second World Wars. As you see, they brought together all the Morenos to fight each other in their war. But it wasn't a war, it was just a war of attrition, them using ideologies that each of them were a part of, making you believe they're against each other and you fighting, killing each other, reducing your numbers on their behalf. Now, as they did this, they created the Aswan Dam in the Nile in Egypt, beginning the process of killing the earth, shutting down its arteries, its water arteries, drying it out, creating this desert or desertifying the earth. And at the same time, they destabilized the land to such a point that there was no employment. So people began the process of moving around as per the Maastricht Treaty, signed off, I think, in 1888. Maybe just a little bit earlier, 1886, maybe. Now, the Spanish Revolution, the counter-revolution in the 1800s up towards 1886 was a part of this process. Now, once again, just as in the French Revolution and the absolute lie, this is the Russian Revolution, it was all orchestrated by Slavs. So this is the reason why it always ends up back in the hands of the Slavs. And even though, as in the French Revolution, Slavs' heads were cut off and they were thrown on the bonfires, there were many Slavs who were still left in power, as in Russia. And those Slavs who were still left in power, part of the bourgeois, they continued exactly where the rulers you killed left off. They just took a little bit longer to do so, which is why the word is called revolution and not rebellion, as I put in one of the poems. Because revolution is to go around in circles, come back to where you began, as if it never even stopped in the first place. Where rebellion is to end it full stop. Now, via the Maastricht Treaty and the destabilization of these lands in the Mediterranean, people began moving. From then, the Slavs began buying up the properties, as all these mountain villages in Italy, the Piedmont region, began to empty out. And by the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, many of them are empty. Towards the end of the 20th century, completely empty, just old people, no young. And these lands were all bought up by the Slavs and the Jews. Even all the farms that were left behind were bought up by the Slavs and the Jews. And today, these farms are the production of food in the areas that they use as they poison us in the production of pesticides and herbicides and all the other stuff they put into food via the GM. Now, this process, as I said, was part of the Maastricht to create the movement of people as they destabilized lands, making people believe they could find employment everywhere they went, not realizing they were being fodder for the commercial system. And the very situations they found themselves in their lands was all false, designed between peoples of different land leaders who were all Slavs and Jews, brothers and sisters and friends. Now, with the breakup of Russia in the 20th century, 1900s, you had to have the inclusion of the Balkan states into Europe. Now, obviously, the Balkan states being, how can I put it, under-industrialized in comparison to the rest of Western Europe, required lots of funding. Cue the EU fund. So the European Union fund is put together to fund the capitalization of all these building projects throughout the Balkan states, and cue all the commercial companies owned by the Slavs and the Jews taking these European funds, which have been created by the taxpayers of the rest of Europe. So they've taken your taxpayers' money, they've created funds of trillions, they're sending over half a trillion per instance into the Balkan states, which is all going to the hands of Slavs and Jews as they build shit infrastructure into these lands, because most of it isn't going to last for 50 years, not even that. And they've robbed you all in the process. Criminals, right? All the Slavs, all the Morenos of the Balkan states have been leaving the Balkan states, coming into the rest of Europe trying to find work, while the Slavs and the Jews have got on with destabilizing the rest of Europe, as you can now see. And they've created this COVID virus, as I've already shown you, as per the chemical warfare program began post-Second World War, probably began before, as per the research papers I've told you written by the World Health Organization, in line with the Maastricht Treaty. This is management of population, management of peoples as you move them around for commercial interest. They've created it to destabilize the land even further. So you can see as the Balkan state Morenos have moved into the rest of Europe, they've created this greater competition for work, greater competition for employment. Now, this greater competition is unnecessary because inflation is false. Interest is false, created purely for a system of finance and money, which is false, based on death, that I've shown in previous videos. So you have all these different ideas which lead to the loss of jobs, because inflation leads to increasing of prices. Therefore, people have to lose jobs so companies can keep their profits rising, because diminishing returns, another false idea, is included in the economy. And you have all this taking place since the 1900s, late 1900s, leading towards now, where people are trying to go back home and they can't, because the Slavs and the Jews own all their houses and they're all renting them. They're no longer part of public housing systems because, as per the last video, all the governments, local and national, have come together in the changing of local laws, national laws, in the selling off of public property, creating this private property, which you have to go through an immobiliaria or agency to find a home. And this was actively done. You just have to go back to the 80s and 90s and you'll see all the laws changing to permit them to buy these properties. Previous to the 80s, maybe late 70s, you couldn't buy a property unless you'd been living in it for 16 years minimum, 20 years on average. Come 80s and 90s, they start changing all the laws to permit all these immigrants incoming billionaires and millionaires to buy up all the property and create the condition you find yourselves in. Now, as part of this process, in the 70s and 80s, Margaret Thatcher, when she came along, as per the laws changing for them to buy up all the houses, she changed all the laws to change pensions, to make sure all of you are paupers in your old age, and this fits into now quite adequately. So up until the 80s and 90s, or the 80s, and the privatisation of companies within England, the public pension fund sat at around a couple trillion, maybe a bit more, because it was set up just after the Second World War. The National Health Service was set up after the Second World War, along with the National Insurance System, to give people a living post-working age, and to allow the company to redevelop itself after the Depression, after the Second World War. Now, these funds have been building up since the end of the Second World War, up until the 80s and 90s, and because of it, the capitalists, the commercial interests, the Slavs and Jews, i.e., and some of the traitors who are the Asians, the Chinese and the Japanese and the Middle East, they wanted access to these funds, which laws denied them. So Margaret Thatcher, during the process of privatisation of England, she changed the laws. So rather than having this cap on the system where you weren't allowed to plunder, she then changed the laws, allowing them to plunder, but not permitting any pension fund to go under 5 billion. Obviously, they were plundered. Trillions left all the pension funds. And as a result, today, many of you are penniless, without a pension. Now, I have gone around on my journeys and I've met many people who are pensioners who are homeless during this COVID crisis. I met one this morning, 67 years old. The man had slept in a laundrette for the night to keep warm, and I'd gone to the laundrette first thing in the morning, 6 o'clock this morning, to wash my clothes before I went out to do my morning meditation with Ra. Speaking to this man, he's talking about the COVID and no jobs and blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, well, how is a 67-year-old, after a lifetime of working and paying taxes, a French 67-year-old, so paying taxes in France, homeless? How does that happen? How is it even permitted that a pensioner can be on the street? Now, the ideas behind this began with Margaret Thatcher also in Europe, as you see when she created the poll tax, which didn't last very long, but she sent loads of pensioners into jail, Second World War fighters, mind you, into jail for a non-payment of poll tax. And you, that lady who called Margaret Thatcher a witch, ding dong, the witch is dead when she died, and the Slavs and the Jews of the papers lambasted you when you said sorry. Never say sorry ever again. You were right to say ding dong, the witch is dead, because she was a whoring witch at that. She put many pensioners into jail because they couldn't pay a poll tax, a tax on life. And these people fought for the very life she had, because she's a Slav, and set our people, Morenos of England and the rest of Europe, to fight so they could have their wants, they could have their greeds satisfied. She should have had her head chopped off. She should have never been allowed to die the way she did. So Margaret Thatcher changed all the laws, which allowed all the pension funds to be plundered. And via her act, all the other pension funds around the world that existed at that point began to be plundered. And since then, no pension has ever gone beyond 5 billion, because the laws have now allowed them to be plundered every time they go above that point. And which is why now every pension fund on earth, over a certain number of citizens, is never going to satisfy the pension payments to those citizens when they're at pensionable age. Which is why none of you should be paying into a pension. It's theft. And they are stealing off you knowingly. They are all bloody criminals. And this is all set up. So there you see how the Maastricht Treaty, how the First and Second World War, how the creation of national insurance, the ending of national insurance, the creation of capitalist system in the UK, the breaking up of Russia, the movement of people via the Maastricht Treaty, and the current condition you're in via the chemical warfare program, via the World Health Organization, how these all come together to form the very position we're in today, in addition to the video that I last put out. So you see, none of this is a coincidental coming together of things. None of it. And I started off with a video that was 3 decades, maximum 4 decades, because it's every 3 decades it changes. And I've now used this video to take it back an extra 100 odd years. You can see that the plan does work, 100 odd years, 130 years maximum at a go, forming their 1,000-year plans as per the Iliad via each century. Take a look, you'll see this for yourself. I've only given you a very high level because I have to be walking and strolling in meditation through Nice, and these things have come up. And given my conversation with the pensioner this morning, this is very pertinent for all of you to see. To the day, there is not a single Slav or Jew on earth, and all the traitors have either stopped being traitors or have joined them. Until that day, my beautiful people, mes amis.